Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. A 2-year-old toddler was found dead in the rubble after a Russian drone and missile attack on Kyiv, bringing the death toll to 31 people, including 3 children. Over 159 people were wounded, with the attack involving more than 300 drones and 8 missiles, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he hopes Ukraine peace talks will continue through working groups, but stressed that Russia's goals remain unchanged, speaking ahead of a U.S. ceasefire deadline set by President Donald Trump. This comes as Russian forces claim to have captured Chasiv Yar, a claim Ukraine denies. President Donald Trump's tariffs deadline has passed, setting a 35% rate on Canada and 25% on India. With tariffs rising from the 10% baseline, Asia shares fall while Mexico gets a 90-day extension, and copper de minimis imports face changes. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has now visited food distribution sites in Gaza, aided by the Israeli military, as part of efforts to deliver more food in the region. The UN reports at least 1,373 Palestinians have died while trying to access aid since May. Meanwhile, France has begun airdropping 40 tons of humanitarian aid into Gaza, with President Emmanuel Macron urging Israel to open full humanitarian access. Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has said that 4 flights from Jordan are now delivering aid, as global monitors warn of malnutrition and child deaths amid severe access restrictions. Cambodian Deputy Prime Minister Sun Chantol says they will nominate U.S. President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in halting a recent border conflict with Thailand. The nomination follows what Pham Phai describes as Trump's direct intervention in easing tensions between the two Southeast Asian neighbors. Lebanon's health ministry said 4 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon on Thursday. The Israeli military claimed the attack targeted Hezbollah infrastructure, including what Defense Minister Yoav Gallant called the group's biggest precision missile manufacturing site. Farmers in central Hungary's drought-stricken agricultural region are now considering abandoning their land as climate change slashes crop yields and depletes groundwater. The Hungarian Meteorological Service warned that soil remains critically dry. This U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff visited an aid distribution site in Gaza operated by the American privately owned Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Witkoff, along the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, toured the GHF distribution point as starvation worsens across the enclave. The visit comes as Witkoff works on a plan to accelerate aid deliveries to Gaza. According to the White House, he arrived in Israel on Thursday as part of renewed U.S. efforts to mediate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, following a breakdown in talks last week. Meanwhile, as per reports, a global hunger monitor said on July 29 that a famine scenario is unfolding in Gaza, with soaring malnutrition rates, child deaths linked to hunger, and severely restricted humanitarian access. The UN also estimated that since May, Israeli forces have killed more than 1,000 people seeking food, many near militarized GHF distribution sites. Meanwhile, France and Spain have stepped up humanitarian support, with France conducting military aid drops and Spain delivering 12 tons of supplies by air to Gaza. Now we're joined by Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, we are seeing U.S. government actively involving in this aid and with Gaza situation. What role could Special Envoy Steve Witkoff play in facilitating this humanitarian response, especially after last week's talks stalled?
That's a really interesting question because, at times the United States and Special Envoy Witkoff have frankly taken Israel's side. At other times, they've seemed to have played the role of an interlocutor, working with Qatar and Egypt to try and bring Hamas and Israel closer to a ceasefire agreement. What really is the big unknown here is what is the willingness of the United States to put pressure on Israel. There's been some recent statements by President Trump about the malnutrition and starvation situation among civilians in Gaza. So that may have been put a little bit of pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu. But again, how much pressure is the United States willing to put on Israel, and specifically what kind of message is Witkoff bringing from President Trump to Netanyahu? We can only speculate about that.
And now, Ross, in light of the failed ceasefire talks last week again, what are the prospects for renewed negotiations between Israel and Hamas?
One thing we know from recent or even throughout the period of the war between Israel and Hamas going back to October of 2023, the ceasefire talks have often been on again and off again. And sometimes when they go off, there's no resolution. Sometimes when they're on and off, they go back on, and they do reach a ceasefire agreement. We saw that earlier this year with the ceasefire, even though it only lasted a brief period, and eventually war resumed in March. But the takeaway here is that we should never assume that ceasefire talks are dead. It's very clear that the interlocutors, again, that's Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, they have continually worked with the two sides, Israel and Hamas. They have never completely given up on ceasefire talks, and they deserve credit for that. The Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Trump administration deserve credit for their willingness to continue to engage both sides in potential ceasefire talks. So I think we should never completely give up on the hope for a ceasefire. It's always possible that those talks could resume and come to some positive conclusion.
Yes, and Ross, now given the ongoing famine and starvation crisis in Gaza, how effective are current international efforts, including those by US, France, Spain, and other countries that you have mentioned?
It's clearly not enough. Despite statements to the contrary by politicians in Israel, it's clear that the civilians are suffering from a lack of food and medicine. Civilians in Gaza are suffering from a lack of food and medicine. And as we've talked about many times here on NewsX, there's this issue about how responsive is the Israeli government to international pressure. At times, they frankly have not been responsive at all, but at times, yes, they are responsive. So I would say that Prime Minister Netanyahu ultimately is responsive to international criticism. He's responsive to pressure from governments in Europe, including from countries, or especially from countries that generally are very friendly towards Israel, like France or the United Kingdom. So I think we're seeing that in recent days with Israel's agreement to allow aid drops from European governments, that yes, Netanyahu is responsive to international criticism and pressure, and he's willing to adjust his policies to provide more aid.
And Ross, yes, you've already kind of mentioned this, but how did these reports that are coming from that are coming from other news outlets that Israeli forces killing civilians near aid distribution sites, do you think these kind of news affected international perceptions of Israel military actions? Do you think that it had some effect?
Yeah, we have this story in the past 24 hours of this former retired American military officer who did serve with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or provided security for its aid distribution. And he was on Tucker Carlson's show. He did a video with Senator Bernie Sanders, and he was very critical of the entire arrangement. And he said that civilians are being harmed when they're simply trying to access the food aid. So again, I would say that the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu, they are responsive to this kind of negative publicity. Yeah, it's taken a lot of negative publicity to get them to adjust their policies, but they are responsive to it.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now we move on to our next news. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has said that Israel must stop violent attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank. Speaking in the Christian West Bank village of Taipei, Wadephul also said that Jewish settlements in the West Bank were created in conflict with a two-state solution. Let's take a closer look at what the German Foreign Minister had to say.
Das sind keine Einzelfälle, sondern solche Taten nehmen immer mehr zu und diese Taten werden begangen von gewalttätigen jüdischen Siedlern. Ich möchte hier ganz klar sagen, solche Taten sind Verbrechen, sie sind Terror und sie gehören endlich polizeilich verfolgt. Berichte, dass Angehörige der IDF tatenlos zugesehen haben oder das sogar unterstützt haben sollen, sind erschreckend. Israel muss als Besatzungsmacht und als Rechtsstaat Sicherheit und Ordnung durchsetzen und Straftaten verfolgen. Es muss die palästinensische Bevölkerung vor diesen Gewalttätern schützen. Klar, jegliche Annexionsfantasien, seien es für Gaza oder für das Westjordanland, die auch von Teilen der israelischen Regierung hervorgebracht werden, lehnen wir ebenso klar ab. Sie würden von Deutschland nicht anerkannt.
This comes after the German foreign minister had held talks with his Israeli counterpart Gideon Sa'ar on Thursday in Jerusalem and had condemned the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. Now we're joined by Ali M. Abushbak. He's a Middle East researcher, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you, Ali, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, Germany's foreign minister has called for Israel to halt violent actions in the West Bank. How significant is this criticism from a longtime European ally, especially given Germany's history?
Thank you, Suma, for having me again. The thing is, it's a surprising statement from the foreign minister of German, especially German, take a long stand with Israel since the beginning of this war and taking a stand with Israel for a long time. So today is after 29 of civilians from West Bank have been killed by Israeli settlement since past 2 years. And recently that the Palestinian activist Auda al-Hadalin, the director of the documentary about No Other Land, has been killed by Israeli settler. So it is significant for the criticizing and lambasting Israelis action or Israelis invasion for the people for unarmed people, and usually this kind of attack by the settler, it's covered by Israeli soldier. I mean, and also this kind of attack, it's documented by the civilians and by the activists, which no doubt about the crime that the Israeli settler has been conducted. So also the settlement in West Bank, it's considered illegal according to the United Nations Resolution 2334 that in 2006 considered the Israeli settlement in West Bank and occupied Palestine, it's illegal and should be held this kind of establishment. So meanwhile, there is Israelis minister that Smotrich continuously called for develop the settlement and for to extend the settlement in West Bank as well as in Gaza. So I guess we can say this kind of criticism embarrassed Israel in front of the international community, but it has no meaning. So it's just only condemnation, or for it's only criticism. There is no an action. There is no sanction imposed to Israel to eliminate it and to stop Israel from violating the international law and the humanitarian international humanitarian law on the ground. Also, while the people from West Bank suffering from mobility because of the Israelis. Because of the Israeli barriers in West Bank, there is and they consider it, according to international media, it's the most militarized area in the world, West Bank. Also, we have seen and witnessed on several of footage that how much Israeli settlers are aggressive, and we can't forget the video and the footage that has been has went viral during the Sheikh Jarrah evacuation in 2021, when the Palestinian, she asked the Israeli settler about his stealing her home, and he quoted, "If I will not steal it, there is other one will steal it." So this is went viral, and it's changed the international opinion about the concept, about the natural of this war and the conflict between Palestine and Israel. I guess this make a new awareness about what is happening on the ground and rebuild the comprehensive about what is about the rebuild the comprehensive about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which we have seen as several of movement, as several of social activists. They take the street and pressurize their government and pressurize the international community for justice in this kind of territories, which are suffering from long-term conflict between Israeli and Palestinian. While also today, Smotrich, he claims that he will not let the Palestinian statehood to establish until he's holding his position in Israeli government. And we can see how much this kind of Israelis minister fascist, and how much they are anti-Palestinian, and they don't have any kind of social and socio-political coexistence between Israeli and Palestinian community.
Thank you, Ali Emma Bushbach, for joining us and sharing your insight all the way from Middle East. Now we move on to our next news. China faces a critical deadline on August 12 to finalize a tariff agreement with the Trump administration. After preliminary deals in May and June, the U.S. has unveiled new reciprocal tariffs ranging from 10% to 41% on goods from dozens of countries. The latest round of talks in Stockholm failed to extend the tariff pause, with the decision now resting on President Donald Trump. While most tariffs will drop for several countries, China remains a notable exception. Talks between the U.S. and China continue, but without a deal. Global supply chains could face renewed turmoil. Additionally, U.S. tariffs on Russian oil could further complicate China's trade stance. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, how might this additional U.S. tariffs on Russian oil complicate China's position in these trade negotiations?
It certainly doesn't make China happy. They've enjoyed the benefit of importing low-priced energy from Russia, plus the political benefit that comes with firming up their relationship with Russia, even though China has repeatedly denied that it takes sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. But the situation, frankly, has benefited China for over 3 years. So if Trump is introducing tariffs related to China's support for Russia or import of Russian energy, it's not going to sit well with China. So it's just going to make the negotiations over a larger agreement even more complex.
And now, what could this have on China's trade policies and alliances moving forward?
The challenge for China is that it wants to develop markets other than the United States. It wants a better trade relationship or market access in the European Union, in the Middle East, in Africa. But there's also very well-known criticisms of China that comes from those places. So people are concerned about security issues from Chinese IT equipment that might have backdoors that gives the Chinese government access to data and other information. There's concerns about China flooding markets with low-priced goods because China has industrial overcapacity. In Africa, there's the well-known concern about China lending for infrastructure projects that governments have trouble repaying. So it's clear that China's policy is to diversify from the United States as a market for exports or for investment. But whether or not China can really succeed in that in the coming years, that's very much an open question.
Thank you, Ross Feingold, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Amid the conundrum over Russia-Ukraine war, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that Moscow hopes for more peace talks with Ukraine, but that the momentum of the war was in its favor. This signals no shift in his stance despite a looming sanctions deadline from Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he will impose new sanctions on Moscow and countries that buy its energy exports. In this list, China and India are the biggest buyers. Reacting on Russia's latest attack on Ukraine, United States President expressed his mounting frustration with Putin. Meanwhile, President Putin, without referring to the Trump deadline, said 3 sessions of peace talks with Ukraine had yielded some positive results, and Russia was expecting negotiations to continue. The Ukrainian government has said that the Russian negotiators do not have the mandate to take significant decisions, and President Volodymyr Zelensky has called out on Putin to meet him for talks, while Russia says a leaders' meetings could only take place to set the seal on agreements reached by negotiators. Now we're joined by Dr. Vipul Saxena. He's a defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Dr. Vipul, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, with new U.S. sanctions looming, how might Russia's continued reliance on energy exports to countries like China and India influence the effectiveness of these sanctions?
So I think the way Trump administration and Trump personally is conducting, the diplomacy and the foreign relations and the trade deals, I think they have exposed themselves that they have no, permanent stand. They are behaving like a trader who is ready to do any kind of negotiation for their benefit. And in that scenario, they have lost almost trust of every country that today the Trump administration may say this, tomorrow they may turn around and say, no, this is not right, I will do like this. So in such situation, the threat which used to be there earlier from the United States, I think it has lost the ground, and no country is taking Trump administration or there any kind of threat of sanctions and all seriously. So I don't see any kind of threat from Russian energy to Asia or China and all that. I don't think any threat to this kind of deal because of Trump's sanction threats.
Thank you, Dr. Vipul.
As far as Ukraine talks are concerned, I think what Putin is saying is right, that normally the transactions and deals initially are discussed at diplomatic level, at bureaucratic level, and once there is the terms conditions agreeable to both the sides, then only the leaders meet to sign off the agreement.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Vipul, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you as we stay in this region now. In his latest comments, President Putin emphasized that the West's sole focus is to halt Russia's military progress at all costs. He stated that the situation on the ground is clear, with Chasiv Yar having been secured by Russian forces days ago. President Putin confirmed that Russian troops are advancing along the entire front line in Ukraine. He also revealed that the new Oreshnik missile system has entered mass production, with the first batch now delivered to Russian troops. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Vipul Saxena. He's a defense expert. Thank you, Dr. Vipul, for staying with us. Dr. Vipul, can you tell us more about Russia's defense missile system, Oreshnik?
See, Russia has been, one of the leaders, global leader, when it comes to missile system or anti-missile defense system. It has been one of the top leaders, and their systems are very, very effective and very, very aggressive. So in that scenario, I go with the Russians' claim. And what Putin has said is that European nations are basically trying to, downturn the Russian military system on Russian attacks or Russian military actions. I think that is true. I would say that it is time that Zelensky, as a national leader of Ukraine, has to think on a long term, because whatever aid is coming from US or from the European nations, it is not coming free. They will definitely ask for their chunk of flesh, and that will be too costly for economy of the Ukraine for a very long term, because all these countries, they are basically eyeing for the rare earth deposits that Ukraine has in large quantities. So it is not that they are doing a favor or they are doing a charity. So I think time has come where Zelensky must think practically, pragmatically, in the interest of Ukraine, and try to settle some kind of deal with Russia as early as possible.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Vipul Saxena, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a defense expert. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.